On a sultry summer night, in a small town hidden among the dry lands of Texas, something unexpected broke the doldrums of a forgotten dance. Everyone laughed, jeered, and pointed fingers when Grandma Mary, a white-haired woman with unsteady steps, dared to stand up and dance alone in the middle of the dusty ballroom. The laughter echoed like whips in the heart of that woman who, even embarrassed, continued to dance with teary eyes as if searching for a ghost in the crowd. That image was a cry of pain that no one there seemed to hear except one man, a widowed farmer with a somber gaze and heavy steps, who watched from afar without saying a word. I was there, sitting in a dark corner, and I confess, I also didn't understand why that lady was doing that, but something inside me broke when I saw that, despite her laughter, she was smiling into space, as if dancing with someone who was no longer there. The farmer then adjusted his hat, stood up with a weight on his chest, and walked purposefully to the middle of the room. Silence fell upon the room as he stopped before her, respectfully removed his hat and asked, "May I have this dance?" The room stopped. Time stood still, and I never forgot what happened next. Share this story to reach further, subscribe to the channel, share this video on WhatsApp, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I'll be very happy to read each comment. Let's go back in time now to understand how it all began. Mary wasn't born old. She was a girl with lively eyes and nimble legs, born in a village of English settlers who came to seek land in the Texas countryside. From a young age, Mary had an inexplicable love for dance. Any music that played, even if it was just the sound of an out-of-tune guitar on the porch, she would rise and spin like a music box ballerina. Dance was her refuge, her joy. While still young, she met Thomas, a dark-skinned boy with calloused hands and an easy smile, who also loved music. They were married to the sound of a banjo and feet tapping on the wooden floor. It was the most joyful wedding the village had ever seen. With Thomas, Mary learned that dancing was more than just moving her body. It was a pact of the soul, a celebration of life even in the worst storms. Together, they raised 2 children and managed a small plot of land where they grew corn and hope. But life isn't always kind. First, a drought took the harvest. Then a mysterious fever took Thomas away in less than a week. And finally, a stagecoach accident stole her eldest son. Each loss was a dance that ended, a song that was forever silenced in Mary's heart, but she kept going, even if it was dancing alone in the kitchen with tears streaming down her face. Time passed, and solitude became her only companion. Her neighbors began to see her as the strange old woman who dances alone. She no longer cared. With each step, Mary relived moments no one else saw. Thomas's smile, the laughter of her children running through the fields, the smell of bread baking as the gramophone played. She didn't dance for the living. She danced for the departed, to keep from going mad. Still, something in her screamed for company, for a gaze that would see her as a woman and not a shadow. When news of the Greenfield Ranch annual dance arrived, Mary felt butterflies in her stomach. It had been decades since she'd set foot in a dance hall. She knew she'd be laughed at, but something inside her needed to hear loud music, step on hardwood floors, smell the wood and sweat. She dressed in what little she had, a floral dress and a blue ribbon, the same one she'd worn to her first dance with Thomas, and with her heart pounding she went, but no one expected her, no one wanted her. She danced alone, amidst muffled laughter and cruel stares, like a memory no one wanted to carry anymore. Dusty Creek was a place where time seemed to slip slowly through the cracks in the wooden doors, where every face aged early from the scorching sun and the sadness the desert wind carried. It was a town where everyone knew each other, but no one truly saw each other. Mary lived in a remote shack just beyond the dry hill, where weeds grew like ghosts from the past. Her house was small, made of weathered planks, but inside there were still traces of a home that had once been full of laughter, a rocking chair that groaned when the wind blew, a sepia portrait of Thomas smiling, and an old gramophone that insisted on playing scratched records. Mary spent her days talking to herself, murmuring stories in portraits and dancing with nothingness. The ground creaked beneath her feet, and the dust rose as if it wanted to dance with her too. But what weighed most heavily wasn't the silence, it was the oblivion. The town seemed to have forgotten that she had once been anything other than the dancing old lady. The townswomen whispered at the fairs, saying she had lost her mind. The men laughed in the taverns, inventing stories that she danced with ghosts. The children, cruel in their innocence, threw stones at her fence and ran away, laughing loudly. Still, Mary didn't give up. Each morning was a new beginning, filled with pain, but also with hope. She would put on her most beautiful dress, even if torn, put a ribbon in her hair, and dance to the sound of the wind, imagining that somewhere in her memory, Thomas was still watching her and smiling. Her body no longer held its former vigor, her bones creaked with every step, but her heart still beat to the rhythm of memories. On cold nights, Mary would sit on the porch, gazing up at the star-studded sky. There she would speak softly to those who had passed, as if the sky were a vast dance floor where one day they would all be reunited. She would pray silently that time would be kind and allow her to dance once more with someone real, not just the shadows of the past. But the days dragged on, growing ever more lonely, and hope felt like an old torn dress at the bottom of a trunk. Still, she held onto that blue ribbon as if it were a promise that there would still be music in her life. Mary's loneliness was so dense it felt heavy, a weight that could be seen in her hunched shoulders and in her ever-wet eyes. So when word spread around town about the Greenfield Ranch Ball, a tradition that brought families together, young and old, something inside Mary stirred. She sat for hours, staring at the blue ribbon and the old flowered dress, debating whether she had the courage to go. And when she finally decided, it was as if an invisible thread pulled her back, to a time when her youth had made her body light as a feather. She knew it would be an insult to show up there. She knew laughter would be inevitable, but her longing overcame her fear. And so, with slow steps and a pounding heart, Mary walked down the hill toward town, unaware that that night, fate was preparing something that would change everything. That night, Greenfield Ranch shone brighter than ever. Hanging lanterns illuminated the wooden entrance, where well-dressed couples arrived, exuding the scent of lavender and new leather. The smell of apple pie, fresh coffee, and cornbread wafted through the air, mingled with the sound of tuned violins and raucous laughter. The dance floor was a large, polished wooden floor, surrounded by rustic tables and makeshift barrels as benches. There the elite of Little Dusty Creek gathered to forget the hardships of the countryside and the losses of a hard life. It was there that Mary appeared, shy, her flowered dress already faded, her blue ribbon trembling in her white hair. As she entered, she felt as if every glance pierced her like a hot knife through butter. Conversation ceased for a brief moment, replaced by looks of astonishment and contempt. Mary pretended not to notice, keeping her head high. She leaned against the band and waited. The music played lively, couples twirled, and she simply watched until an old blues song began. Without thinking, as if driven by an inner impulse, Mary stood up and walked to the center of the dance floor. Her steps were slow, her feet hesitant, but her body remembered. The body always remembers. She twirled slowly, her arms open as if beckoning an old love back. But the scene, which for her was a reunion with the past, for others was a ridiculous spectacle. Laughter began to echo in the corners. Some men pointed and mockingly imitated her steps. The women laughed with their hands over their mouths, feigning modesty, but not hiding their contempt. Mary heard it all, each laugh like a needle in her chest. Still, she continued. She closed her eyes and saw herself young again, dancing with Thomas at their first ball together when he told her, "No one dances like you, Mary." She clung to that compliment like someone clinging to the edge of an abyss. The ballroom was a field of cruel laughter, but in her heart there was music, there was memory, there was love. Yet, when she opened her eyes and saw everyone laughing at her, a single tear fell. The ground seemed to have dropped beneath her feet. It was at that moment that a strange sound cut through the hall, the sound of heavy boots walking, steady and resolute. A tall man with a worn leather hat, a stubble of beard, and a sad look in his eyes was advancing toward her. Each step was a challenge to laughter. It was John Miller, the widowed farmer everyone respected, but no one dared approach. A man who also carried too many ghosts to talk about trivialities. As he reached Mary, he slowly removed his hat, revealing grey hair as marked as his hard face. The room fell silent. Everyone waited for the next mockery, but he simply said, in a deep, firm voice, "May I have this dance?" And at that moment, the laughter died. The silence was so deep that you could hear the wind blowing against the windows. John Miller wasn't just any man in Dusty Creek. His name carried stories of hard work, of a farm that thrived when everything around him turned to dust. But no one knew the ghosts he hid behind his brown eyes and stubble. John had deeply loved a woman named Eleanor, with whom he shared his days and nights on his isolated farm. Eleanor was his guiding light, the woman who laughed at his bad jokes and danced barefoot in the barn when the sky threatened rain. But life, always relentless, took Eleanor one cold winter morning, a strong and swift fever, the kind that doesn't ask for permission. From then on, John stopped dancing, stopped smiling, stopped living beyond work. He carried the pain like someone carrying a heavy sack of wheat, silent and resigned. The Greenfield Ranch dance wasn't part of his plans. He was dragged along by his friends, who told him he was aging too quickly, that he needed to see people to escape the shadow of his own sadness. John went, but the whole time he leaned against one of the wooden beams, watching the action without interest, until he saw Mary. He saw that lady in the flowery dress and shaky steps, dancing alone in the center of the room. Something in her manner, the sadness hidden in each turn, the smile that hid a sob, moved John deeply. He saw in her a reflection of himself, someone who danced with the dead, who relived love with solitary gestures, and it disconcerted him. The laughter around him sounded like razors, each laugh an insult not only to her, but to everyone who had ever loved and lost. He clutched his hat in his hands, feeling the cold sweat on his palms. Something inside him told him he had to do something, break that cycle of cruelty that was spreading like weeds. So, without much thought, he walked to the middle of the room. Each step he took was a break from his own grief. Eyes followed him, some with curiosity, others with restrained mockery. But John didn't care. When he stopped before Mary, he saw her eyes up close, her skin scarred by time, but her soul. Oh, her soul still danced with fervor. He removed his hat with a gesture that mixed respect and longing, and his voice was deep, choked, but firm. "May I have this dance?" Mary froze. She didn't know if she was dreaming or if time had played tricks on her. No one had asked her to dance since Thomas. She looked around, saw open mouths, wide eyes. A lump formed in her throat, but she nodded shyly. John extended his hand, calloused, firm as that of a man who had held life and death. She accepted. And when their hands touched, something invisible happened. A bond between two broken hearts that recognized each other in the rhythm of grief. And then they started dancing. The hall, once a stage for mockery, became a temple of silence. No one dared laugh or comment. It was as if an enchantment had descended upon everyone there. John and Mary began to move slowly, their feet gliding carefully, respecting each other's rhythm. At first, it was just a timid lurch, like someone learning to walk after years of paralysis. But little by little, Mary's body remembered. The body always remembers. Her steps became lighter, and she let herself be guided by John's strong hand, who, even though he hadn't danced in years, knew how to lead with respect and delicacy. Mary's gaze, once shadowy, began to shine. She no longer danced alone. Finally, someone saw her soul dance. John also felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. The warmth of another person, the smile that blossomed effortlessly, the music that finally made sense. As they spun in the center of the room, he looked into her eyes and in a whisper only she could hear said, "You should never dance alone again." That sentence was more than an invitation. It was a promise that all was not lost, that love never dies, only sleeps in lonely hearts. Mary felt a sob catch in her throat and held his hand tightly, afraid it was just a dream the morning sun would wash away. The musicians, who until then had been lost in the face of the scene, began to play with more emotion, a slow, deep blues, like the lament of someone who has lost something precious but still insists on singing. People around began to approach, curious, touched by something they couldn't explain. Laughter gave way to respect. Some men silently removed their hats. Women discreetly wiped away the tears that insisted on welling up. And there, on that wooden dance floor, two widowers, two survivors of grief, danced as if time had never passed. Each turn was an embrace of the past. Each step was an apology to life for having given up on happiness so soon. Mary felt her feet floating, not from lightness, but from the weight finally being shared with someone. John, for his part, remembered what it was like to smile with his eyes, to feel his heart beat out of his chest. And in that room, for a few minutes, the world once again became a place where hope still had room to dance. The entire room seemed mesmerized by that unlikely dance between two bodies marked by time, yet guided by souls who still knew how to recognize each other. The silence was no longer uncomfortable. It was a silence of reverence, like that of someone witnessing a miracle without quite understanding how it happened. With each step, with each turn, John and Mary seemed to strip away their own pain before everyone, revealing scars that time had left, but which now no longer seemed so heavy. The creak of the wooden floor, previously almost imperceptible, became music. The sound of boots tapping softly, the rustle of Mary's flowered dress, the glide of John's calloused hands. Everything was poetry without words. The faces that had once been laughing were now silent, their eyes wide and moved. No one dared interrupt the dance because deep down, everyone knew they were witnessing something greater than a simple dance. It was a redemption, a meeting of wounded souls who, for a brief moment, were able to remember what it was like to live fully. Mary, feeling light-hearted for the first time in years, closed her eyes every now and then to hold that moment within her, as if recording a precious memory. The scent of old wood, mixed with John's gentle perfume, made it all seem like a sweet dream from which she didn't want to wake. John, for his part, felt that each step with Mary drew him a little deeper from the dark grief that had imprisoned him since Eleanor's departure. It wasn't a betrayal of his wife's memory, he knew that. It was a tribute to the life he still had, the life he insisted on wasting in solitude. He squeezed Mary's hand lightly, as if to say without words, "I understand you. I also dance with my ghosts." And in that silence, the two spoke more than words ever could. When the song ended, there was no loud applause, just a long collective sigh, as if everyone there had held their breath during that spectacle of humanity. Mary opened her eyes and looked at John with a shy but grateful smile. He returned her smile, that rare kind of smile that illuminates the darkest corners of the soul. They remained hand in hand for a few seconds, as if unwilling to let go of the invisible thread that had bound them. The people around them began to approach, not with mockery, but with embarrassed respect for having been so quick to judge. A man who had previously been chuckling quietly approached, and with a nod said, "It was the most beautiful dance I have ever seen in my entire life." That sentence was a collective apology, an acknowledgement that sometimes cruelty is born of ignorance and fear of what is not understood. And then, without anyone asking, the band started playing again. A cheerful song, an invitation for everyone to dance too. And little by little, a couple here, another there, began to fill the dance floor again. But now, the laughter was different. It wasn't mockery, it was genuine joy. of someone who had learned something that night, that it's never too late to dance, to feel, to live. After that night, Mary never danced alone again. John sought her out the next day, still embarrassed by the spontaneous gesture, but determined not to let their encounter die in the ranch hall. He appeared at her cottage door with a bouquet of wildflowers picked along the way, his hat clutched tightly in his hands and a crooked smile, as if unsure where to begin. Mary opened the door slowly, surprised, but her heart warmed to see him there. They looked at each other in silence, as if they didn't need to say anything to understand everything. And John simply murmured, "Could I join you in a dance? Even if it's on the balcony?" Mary laughed softly, a shy laugh, and nodded. That afternoon, the old gramophone played again. The music, even if scratched, filled the room with a warmth that hadn't been felt in that house for a long time. They danced on the porch, under the intense blue sky, with the scent of wildflowers wafting through the air. With each step, they relearned what it meant to trust, what it meant to allow themselves to feel. The curious neighbors watched from afar, but without mocking. Some even smiled when they saw that old Mary now had company. And more than that, there was a sparkle in his eyes again. Dancing became a routine. They didn't need large halls or loud music. The sound of the wind and the rhythm of each other's hearts were enough. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. John and Mary began to share more than dances. They shared stories, silences, memories. John helped in Mary's small garden, while she baked bread and cakes that filled the house with the scent of childhood. They didn't talk much about the past, but they knew that there, each understood the other's pain without needing explanation. It was a serene, mature, unhurried love, a love that required no promises, just presence. And so, two hearts that had long since given up beating with joy began to beat with hope again. And that's how Dusty Creek changed. People began to see Mary differently, no longer as the strange old woman, but as the woman who taught them it's never too late for a new beginning. John, the once lonely and hard-working farmer, could now be seen smiling in the town square, buying blue ribbons for Mary's hair. They became a symbol in the town, a symbol that pain doesn't have to be the end of the story, that love can begin again, even when the music seems to have ended. The old Greenfield Ranch never again held a ball without Mary and John as guests of honor, and whenever they stepped onto the dance floor, the hall fell silent out of respect. Because everyone knew that there, in that rhythm, danced not just two bodies, but two souls who, despite everything, chose to keep dancing. The years passed in Dusty Creek, like the wind that shapes rocks unhurriedly, and with them, time also left its mark on Mary and John. Their bodies no longer held the same energy as before, but there was something time couldn't erase, the sparkle in their eyes every time a song began to play. They grew old together, holding hands, sharing silences, smiles, and dance steps on the porch at sunset. Their story spread throughout the town and even to other surrounding villages. It wasn't uncommon to see young couples coming from far and wide, just to hear from them how it all began, that fateful night at the Greenfield Ranch. And each time they told the story, Mary's smile would appear serene, and John, always with his hat in his hands, would simply say, "It all started with one step," and a simple question. Their dance became a tradition in Dusty Creek. At every dance, couples made a point of dancing to a song in honor of Mary and John, even when they could no longer attend. The dance floor became a symbol of new beginnings, a reminder that age is no obstacle to love or a new chapter in life. Children grew up listening to that story, learning that respect and empathy are seeds that bear fruit in beauty. No one dared laugh at those who dance alone anymore, because everyone learned that behind every solitary step lies a story worth hearing. When John broke the weight of time and left on a quiet spring morning, Mary didn't cry in front of anyone. She remained seated in the rocking chair, gazing at the horizon, her blue ribbon tied in her hair, her gaze lost in some memory only she could access. That night, she put on a record and danced alone on the porch, as she had done before. But this time, it wasn't loneliness. It was longing. She whispered to the wind as if speaking to John, "I know you still dance with me, even if I can't see it." The neighborhood, out of respect, fell silent, hearing only the creaking of the floorboards and the scratchy music echoing through the night. Mary lived for a few more years, always smiling at passers-by, always with a kind word to offer. When she too passed, the town came to a standstill. Everyone gathered at the old Greenfield Ranch for a final tribute. There were no loud tears, no long speeches, just music. The band played that same slow blues and everyone danced, a way of thanking the woman who taught Dusty Creek to never give up. The wooden dance floor became an altar of memories, a testament to the fact that as long as there is music, there is hope. And to this day, it's said that on the quietest nights, anyone passing by Mary's old house can still hear the soft sound of footsteps dancing on the porch. The wind carries this invisible music, a reminder that love never dies. It only changes form and continues to dance in the hearts of those who never forget. This story of Mary and John is more than a dance. It's a life lesson. How many times, out of pride, fear, or shame, do we fail to reach out to someone dancing alone? How many times do we look at others and judge, unaware of the weight they carry, the ghosts that haunt them? Mary danced alone, not because she wanted to, but because it was the only way she had to keep alive the loves that time tried to take away. And it took courage for a man like John, hardened by pain, to cross the dance floor and say, "May I have this dance?" This simple phrase changed 2 lives, and as a bonus, an entire city. Perhaps today, somewhere near you, there's someone dancing alone, whether silently or taking timid steps through life, and perhaps they're secretly waiting for someone like John to appear and extend a hand. May you be that person. May you have the courage to cross your own hall of fears, judgments, and vanities to make a difference in someone's life. Because deep down, we're all waiting for an invitation to dance again. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone you think needs to hear it. Send it on WhatsApp, post it on your social media, tag that friend or family member who might need a helping hand. And of course, subscribe to the channel to continue hearing stories like this, full of emotion, life, and hope. Tell me in the comments where you're listening to this story from. I'd love to hear it. And remember, no matter how much time passes, there will always be a song waiting for you. Thank you so much for listening this far, and don't forget, there's always time for one last dance.